I am Laura Mitchell, 32 years old, and I never thought that a simple family dinner would become the night everything shattered. The smell of beef stew still lingered in the air when my brother James leaned across the table, his eyes glassy from the whiskey he had been drinking since he walked in late. My mother and father sat stiffly on either side of him as though they had been waiting for this moment all along. It began with words sharp and cutting the way they always did in our house. James mocked my work, sneering that writing apps was a waste of time compared to the bold ventures he had once tried to build. My mother Evelyn laughed too loudly, eager to back him. My father Charles grunted in agreement, already looking for his next beer. I held my tongue because I had learned over the years that silence was often the only defense. But silence that night was gasoline poured on a flame. James slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. He demanded that I hand over the house our grandparents had left me. He said he needed it more, that it was rightfully his, that I did not deserve it. I reminded him calmly that the deed was in my name, signed and sealed, and that our grandparents had chosen me for a reason. That sentence was like a spark in dry brush. His chair scraped back against the hardwood floor. Before I could stand, his hand lashed across my face. The sting was instant, the sound of the slap echoing through the small dining room. I felt the skin split on the inside of my lip, warm blood filling my mouth and dripping down onto the front of my blouse. My chair tipped as I staggered backward. James did not stop. He shoved me hard with the heel of his boot, his foot catching my side, just below my ribs. The breath left me in a rush as I stumbled toward the front door. My hand slapped the frame for balance, but he gave me one more push. I spilled out into the cold night, the porch light glaring above me, the taste of iron still heavy on my tongue. Behind me, his voice thundered. "This house is mine!" His words were not just a threat. They were a claim, a declaration, as if by violence he could rewrite the will of the dead. I turned back, clutching the railing to keep myself upright. Through the window, I saw my parents, their faces blank, their bodies unmoving. They had not lifted a hand, not even spoken a word. My father lowered his eyes to his plate. My mother folded her hands in her lap, lips pressed tight. In their silence, they chose him. The night air cut against my skin. I pressed my fingers against my mouth, and they came away red. Drops of blood speckled my blouse and darkened in the yellow glow of the porch light. My body shook not only from the pain, but from the humiliation. My own brother had struck me until I bled, had kicked me like I was trash, and my parents had let it happen. I stood at the edge of the yard, staring at the house that once belonged to my grandparents, the only people who had ever seen me as worthy. I remembered sitting with them on summer evenings, my grandmother Margaret teaching me to simmer stew on the stove, my grandfather Henry showing me how to repair a broken circuit board. Their voices had been my anchor. That night, their home had become a battleground, and I had been cast out of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen glowing in the darkness. My reflection showed a swollen lip, eyes bright with unshed tears. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I did not yet know what words could capture the betrayal. My hands trembled too much to type. Instead, I leaned against the car door, forcing my breathing steady. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. For a moment, I feared someone had seen the fight, had witnessed my disgrace. But no one stepped outside. The world carried on indifferent, while my family had just drawn a line I could never ignore. James's shout still rang in my ears. "This house is mine." But even then, as my blood stained the collar of my blouse, another voice rose up inside me, faint but steady. My grandmother's voice. "Do not let them steal your fire. Before I continue, I want to know something from you. Tell me where you are listening from right now and what time of day it is. It brings me comfort to know how far my story reaches, to know that somewhere out there are people who might understand what it feels like to be pushed out by your own blood." That night under the porch light, bleeding and breathless, I whispered to myself the only words that made sense. Game over. I had invited them all with the hope, naive as it might have been, that one evening around a table could ease years of tension. My grandparents had always told me that food could bring people together, that simmering broth and shared plates could soften hard words. That morning, I rose early, chopping vegetables, seasoning beef, and letting the stew bubble slowly with garlic and thyme, just as my grandmother Margaret had shown me when I was a girl. The kitchen filled with steam and warmth, and I convinced myself that maybe tonight my family would remember what it meant to sit together without hostility. I set the table, carefully polishing the silverware that had once belonged to my grandparents, placing fresh flowers in a jar at the center. Each plate carried more than food. It carried my desperate hope for peace. As the clock ticked past the hour, my chest tightened. They were late, as they often were when it came to me. Finally, headlights swept across the window and the door creaked open. James entered first, tall but slightly hunched, his shirt-wrinkled tie half loose, a stale scent of whiskey drifting with him. He did not greet me, but dropped heavily into a chair as though it belonged to him. My mother Evelyn followed, clutching a store-bought pie as if it were a trophy. She handed it over without meeting my eyes, muttering about traffic as though I had inconvenienced her by cooking from scratch. My father Charles nodded vaguely, his attention already searching the kitchen for a drink. I forced a smile and offered wine, but he asked immediately for beer. As I served the stew, I tried to keep the conversation light. I asked about my mother's book club, about my father's golf group's small neutral topics. For a moment it seemed to work. The clinking of spoons filled the air, and there was almost normalcy. But James sat slouched, scrolling his phone between bites, uninterested in anything I said. When I mentioned my new project at work, an app that could help families track budgets, my mother waved me off with a thin smile. "That is nice, Laura," she said, "but James is working on something important. Why don't you tell us about it, sweetheart?" I swallowed my frustration as James launched into a monologue about a new construction venture, something about buying foreclosed houses and flipping them, though I knew he had already defaulted on loans from his last attempt. My father nodded along as if James were a visionary while I sat there invisible. My grandmother's words whispered at the back of my mind. "You are tougher than they think." I held on to that while they praised James for plans that had no foundation. As dinner progressed, the warmth I had cultivated with every chopped carrot and stirred pot evaporated. The house felt colder despite the heat of the stove. Evelyn began asking questions not about me, but about the house, the very one I had inherited. She tilted her head, feigning casual curiosity. "Have you updated the kitchen yet? It would be perfect for James's business." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The words were not innocent. They were a signal. James smirked, setting down his phone at last. "Yeah, Laura," he said, "you don't really need all that space. I am starting fresh. I could make real use of it." My father cleared his throat. "It is a family house. Think about sharing." Sharing. The word tasted like ashes. I had shared enough my college fund drained for James's ventures, my peace sacrificed to their favoritism. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled under the table. Grandma and Grandpa left it to me, not you. The room fell silent except for the low simmer of the stew still bubbling on the stove. James's face darkened. "Do not act superior," he spat, "just because you play with code that nobody uses." My mother's eyes flicked to me, a challenge in her stare. "You are doing fine, Laura. Your brother is in a tough spot." I wanted to scream. Fine. That word had haunted me since childhood. Fine meant overlooked, dismissed, invisible. I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate care. "At least I do not expect handouts." I said, my voice steady, though my pulse raced. The air grew thick. James's chair screeched as he shoved it back. The tension that had built all evening snapped, and though I did not yet know how brutal it would become, I felt the shift, the inevitability. The dinner I had hoped would heal had only set the stage for betrayal. The candles flickered in the draft from the window, and in that moment, the family I thought I might salvage began to collapse in silence and contempt. The silence stretched long enough to make the clink of a spoon against a bowl sound like thunder. I had just told them that the house was mine, that the deed bore my name, and I could see the fury spark in James's eyes like a fuse had been lit. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her lips pinched, but she said nothing. My father reached for his beer and looked away. James pushed his chair back so fast that the legs screeched across the hardwood floor, a sound that jolted through me like a blade dragged against stone. He towered over me, his face flushed red from drink and rage. "You think you are better than me?" he hissed. "You think a piece of paper means you own everything?" His hand came fast. I barely saw it before it landed across my face with a crack that echoed through the dining room. My lips split again, blood spilling down my chin warm and metallic. The taste flooded my mouth until I gagged. My head whipped sideways and I grasped the table to keep from falling. My mother gasped but made no move to rise. My father lowered his eyes. James was not finished. He shoved me backward, the heel of his boot driving into my hip. Pain shot through my side, and I stumbled into the door frame, catching myself only long enough to see the hatred in his eyes. "This house is mine!" he shouted, his voice breaking with raw anger. "Do you hear me, mine?" His spit flew as he yelled, and I realized in that moment he was not trying to win an argument. He was trying to erase me. My back slammed against the front door as he shoved again, and this time I tumbled out onto the porch. The cold air stung my bleeding lip, my blouse already stained with spreading crimson patches. I clutched my ribs, every breath sharp as glass. Behind me, his voice roared one more time. "This house is mine," and the door slammed shut with finality, the lock clicking in place. I stood on the porch, trembling blood dripping from my mouth to the wooden steps, and through the window I saw them. My parents had not moved. My father kept eating my mother's hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes on her son. Their silence cut deeper than James's blow. Their silence said I did not belong. I staggered into the yard, the night swallowing me whole. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of a passing car. The porch light above me buzzed faintly, casting a pale yellow glow that made the blood on my blouse look almost black. I pressed my palm against my side, feeling the ache radiate through bone and muscle, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there in the grass. My phone vibrated in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, my screen blurred with tears and I could not focus on the words. I swiped away the message and held onto the phone like a lifeline. The betrayal burned hotter than the pain. They had cast me out from the home that was meant to be my sanctuary, the home my grandparents had entrusted to me. James had struck me bloody, and my parents had let him. I stumbled to my car, parked at the curb, and leaned against the cold metal. My reflection in the window startled me. My face was swollen, my lips split, and bleeding, my eyes wide with shock. I looked like a stranger, someone I barely recognized. For a long moment, I stood there in the quiet street, trying to steady my breath, but inside me, something shifted. The fear that had ruled my life with them cracked, replaced by a heat that spread through my chest. Their words, their blows, their silence would no longer define me. My grandmother's voice came back as if whispered on the wind. "Do not let them steal your fire." I straightened slowly, ignoring the ache in my side, wiping the blood from my mouth with the back of my hand. James thought violence could rewrite the truth. He thought he could intimidate me into surrendering the only thing I had left of my grandparents. But that night, as the door locked behind me and the lights of the house glowed like a fortress I had been denied, I made a vow. I would fight. I would not let them take it. I whispered the words out loud, tasting blood with every syllable. Game over. I drove away from that house with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white, the blood from my split lip drying sticky against my chin. The headlights cut across the empty Seattle streets, each turn sharper than the last, as if speed could silence the pounding in my chest. My side throbbed from the kick, every bump in the road sending a flare of pain through my ribs. I pulled into a parking lot outside a 24-hour coffee shop and sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, my breath shallow. My phone lit up again with a text from Rachel Carter, my closest friend since college, and now a real estate lawyer who never minced her words. "Are you okay, Laura? Call me." I pressed the call button with trembling fingers, and when she answered, her voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Tell me everything." My words came out halting at first, but soon the story poured out of me, the slap, the blood, the kick, the claim that the house was his. Rachel did not hesitate. "You need to protect what is yours," she said firmly. "Under Washington law, you are the sole heir. They are squatting. They have no rights to that house." Her confidence steadied me. For years, I had been made to feel powerless, as though my achievements were accidents and my brother's failures were noble risks. But here was someone reminding me that the law was on my side. The ache in my ribs did not lessen, but a new strength coiled in my gut. I remembered my grandmother's hands guiding mine over a simmering pot, her voice steady. "Do not let them steal your fire." Those words rose louder than James's shouts. I opened my laptop right there in the car, the screen's glow harsh against the dark night. My fingers shook as I searched through old files until I found the scanned copy of my grandparents' will. Margaret and Henry Wilson's careful handwriting stating without doubt that their house was mine. I traced the letters on the screen with my finger like a prayer. James's rage had not been about family. It had been about possession, about entitlement. But entitlement does not trump ink in law. Rachel urged me to send her the documents immediately. She would review them at once. I attached the files, hit send, and leaned back in the seat exhausted but burning with resolve. Within an hour, she called back. "Laura, it is airtight," she said. 3 witnesses, a doctor's note confirming their mental clarity. Washington's statute of limitations for contesting a will is 3 years. That window closed months ago. James and your parents are out of time. They cannot touch this. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by fury. For months, they had been scheming treating the house as if it were already theirs, asking casual questions about wiring and internet, about renovations, planting seeds, so that when the moment came, they could pounce. Tonight had been the culmination, the mask torn away. I stared at the bruise blooming across my ribcage beneath my blouse and swore I would never be their victim again. Rachel's voice was steady as she outlined the steps. "You can issue an eviction notice within 72 hours, she explained. "Or you can sell. Either way, you need to decide quickly. They are counting on you caving." For the first time in years, the decision was mine, not theirs. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the parking lot settle over me. The coffee shop's neon sign flickered, cars whispered by on the distant road, but inside my chest, a storm raged. I thought of every time my parents had dismissed me, every dollar funneled to James, while I scraped by every holiday dinner where I was treated as an afterthought. I thought of the slap that split my lip, the boot that knocked the air from my lungs, and the door that closed me out. Something broke inside me, but it was not weakness. It was the shell of compliance I had carried for decades. I opened my eyes to the glow of the laptop screen still showing the will. This was my line. They had crossed it with violence. I would answer with resolve. Rachel's last words before hanging up stayed with me. "This is your moment, Laura. They have taken enough. Demand what is yours." I sat there until the pain in my side dulled to a heavy throb and my lip crusted over with dried blood. The night outside felt colder, but my chest burned with clarity. I whispered it to myself again, the words that had become my shield. Game over. The drive back to my apartment was slow, every turn reminding me of the bruise swelling along my ribs. When I closed the door behind me, silence pressed heavy on my chest, but my mind refused to rest. The present was bleeding into the past, memory after memory, unspooling with painful clarity. I thought about the first time I learned what favoritism truly meant. I was 15 and desperate to attend a summer coding camp. It cost $300 a fortune to me then, but not impossible if my parents helped. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, brochures spread out, my heart pounding with hope. My mother shook her head. "Too expensive, Laura. Maybe next year." My father barely glanced up from his newspaper. "James has more pressing needs," he muttered, as if my dreams of learning to program were a frivolity. A week later, James's birthday arrived, and with it a brand new Ford SUV gleaming in the driveway with a bow on top. He was 18, reckless, already known for drinking too much at parties, yet my parents beamed with pride as if rewarding him for failing grades. I stood on the porch, clutching the rejection letter from camp, the words blurring through tears. That was the beginning of the word fine. "You'll be fine," they said, when I asked why James deserved everything, and I deserved nothing. At 17, I had earned straight A's and qualified for a national science fair. I was elated, certain that this recognition would finally earn me their support. The trip required travel money, hotel costs, things I could not cover alone. My mother refused, saying funds were tight, But 2 days later, I overheard her on the phone enrolling James in a private coding boot camp that cost twice as much. I sat on my grandparents' porch that night, sobbing until my chest ached. My grandfather Henry pressed a soldering iron into my hand and told me quietly, "Fix what is broken, starting with yourself." My grandmother Margaret brewed tea and whispered, "They are blind to your worth, but you are stronger than their mistakes." Those nights with them were lifelines. In the garden, Margaret taught me patience as we tended roses, reminding me that growth took time and resilience. In the garage, Henry guided my hands over circuit boards, showing me how to connect wires until light sparked where there had only been darkness. With them, I was seen, nurtured, believed in. At 18, another blow landed. I had assumed my college fund existed, that years of savings were tucked away for me. Instead, I learned the account was empty, funneled into one of James's doomed startups. A construction business that collapsed within months, swallowed everything. My mother avoided my eyes when I confronted her. "Unexpected expenses," she murmured, as if the theft of my future was a minor inconvenience. My father patted my shoulder and told me I would be fine. I worked 30 hours a week at a coffee shop while carrying a full course load in computer science. Exhaustion became a constant companion, but I refused to quit. Every time I considered giving up, I pulled out a letter my grandmother had written me during her illness. "Laura, you gave us love when others only took. This house is yours to protect." I kept it tucked into my desk drawer, the ink smudged from the number of times I read it with tears in my eyes. When my grandparents passed 3 years ago, their will was read aloud in the lawyer's office. I remembered James smirking when he learned the house had gone to me. "Good luck with that fixer-upper," he scoffed, tossing his head back with a laugh. My parents shifted uncomfortably, clearly expecting the inheritance to land in his hands. For once, the law had recognized what love had always known. I moved in, determined to honor their memory. I painted the walls, repaired the porch, installed a smart system that allowed me to control lights and security, every line of code a tribute to my grandfather's lessons. I planted roses in the garden, Margaret's favorites, and each bloom felt like a whisper of encouragement. Still, my parents never stopped pressing. During holidays, my mother would ask whether James could use the guest room for his business. My father hinted that the garage would be perfect for James's equipment. I brushed them off, but unease grew. It was clear they viewed the house not as mine, but as family property available for James whenever he wished. I endured these comments until they crescendoed into tonight's violence, until words became blows, until entitlement became blood on my blouse. The memories stung as vividly as the split on my lip. I realized then that this had not been a single act of cruelty. It had been decades in the making, every slight, every stolen opportunity, every time they had chosen him over me. Tonight was simply the eruption of a volcano that had been smoldering my whole life. I walked to my desk and pulled open the drawer where Margaret's letter still lay. The paper was worn edges frayed, but her words glowed like embers. "Do not let them steal your fire." Tears blurred my vision, but resolve tightened my chest. This was not just about a house. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself that they had tried to take. It was about proving that their neglect and favoritism could not define me. I sat back in the chair, the ache in my side pulsing with each breath, and felt the full weight of my past pressing against me. Then, like a spring snapping free, that weight shifted into fuel. They had underestimated me my entire life. They had believed I would remain quiet, compliant, fine. But I was done being fine. By the next morning, the bruise across my ribs had deepened into an ugly purple. Each inhale a reminder of my brother's boot. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee gone cold beside me and spread out every document I could find. The deed, the will, bank statements, emails from my parents hinting that the house should be James's. The weight of the evidence both angered and strengthened me. They had treated me like a placeholder, as if my ownership were temporary until James decided to claim it. That illusion ended when his slap left blood on my blouse. Now it was war, not in fists and boots, but in paper and law. Rachel arrived mid-morning, her blazer crisp, her expression fierce. She swept the table with a lawyer's practiced eye and nodded. "This is airtight," she said, pointing to the signatures of 3 witnesses and the doctor's certification that my grandparents had full mental capacity when signing. They cannot contest this. The statute of limitations in Washington is 3 years. That expired months ago. If they try any court will dismiss them. I listened, the knot in my stomach loosening slightly. For once, the law was not another weapon to be twisted against me. For once, it was my shield. Rachel leaned closer. Laura, you hold all the cards. You can issue an eviction notice giving them 72 hours to vacate. Or if you want to sever ties completely, you can sell. She produced a folder from her bag and slid it toward me. Inside were listings and offers. My breath caught when I saw the name of the buyers, the Carters, a young couple with 2 small children who had fallen in love with the garden and the charm of the house. Their offer was strong, $850,000, nearly 5 times its value when I inherited it. They were ready to sign. I closed my eyes and pictured Margaret's roses blooming under new care, Henry's workshop repurposed for laughter instead of schemes. The idea of James stomping through that space made bile rise in my throat, but the thought of children's bikes leaning against the fence of joy, untainted by favoritism, steadied me. I signed the preliminary papers with a hand that no longer shook. The sale would close in weeks, but the eviction could start now. Rachel drafted the package certified copies of the will, the signed sale contract, and the eviction notice stamped with the authority of Washington law. When she was done, she handed me the thick envelope. "Send it," she said firmly. "Do not warn them. Do not call. Just send it." I held the envelope, its weight heavier than any blow James had delivered. This was the real strike, the one he would not see coming. That evening, I drove to the courier office, my ribs aching as I stepped from the car. I slid the envelope across the counter, signed the delivery slip, and walked out into the night. My heart pounded, but my steps felt lighter. James had used his fists. I had used the law. One was temporary pain. The other was permanent consequence. Back at home, I sat in the quiet, my computer screen glowing with the email confirmation of delivery. Tomorrow or the next day, my family would open that package. They would see their schemes laid bare, their rights stripped away by ink and seal. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I ran my fingers over my grandmother's letter tucked safely in my desk. Do not let them steal your fire. They had tried with words, with neglect, with violence. But now, with every document signed and every step legally bound, I was taking it back. The package landed on their doorstep 2 mornings later, delivered by a courier with a clipboard and a polite nod, and by evening my phone had already erupted with missed calls. At first, it buzzed once or twice, then again, then a flood of vibrations rattled the table until I set it face down, unable to watch the numbers climb. When I finally glanced at the screen, there were 32 missed calls, most from my mother, some from James, and a handful from my father. I refused to answer. Instead, I brewed tea and sat in the dim light of my kitchen, waiting for the storm to build. It did not take long. My voicemail filled with their voices. My mother's came first, high-pitched and trembling. "Laura, this must be a mistake," she pleaded. "You cannot sell the house. Call me back. We can fix this." Her words were followed by ragged sobs that might have once tugged at my heart, but now sounded rehearsed, manipulative. The next message was from James, his voice a snarl. "You think you can play games with me? You think a piece of paper means you win? I will ruin you, Laura. You are nothing without this family." He hung up with a clatter as though he had slammed his phone against the wall. My father's message arrived after midnight, his tone low and weary. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. You are still our daughter. Call me." Not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he acknowledge that James had struck me bloody at that very table. To them, my resistance was the betrayal, not their violence. The next day, Rachel called to report that James had already contacted a lawyer, a man named Paul Grayson who specialized in contested estates. Rachel laughed dryly. "He does not have a case. The statute of limitations closed the door 3 years ago. His lawyer knows it too, but James will not accept it. He is grasping at straws." That afternoon, James's fury spilled onto social media. A long post appeared on his profile, accusing me of stealing the family legacy of manipulating our grandparents in their final years of selling out my blood for profit. He ended with a threat thinly veiled as a promise. Some people will see who you really are." The comments flooded in cousins and distant relatives, chiming with outrage, parroting his words as if they had been waiting for permission to attack. My phone lit up with their accusations. Thief, traitor, heartless. For a moment, my chest tightened with the old fear, the instinct to defend myself, to explain. But Rachel reminded me of the plan. Do not argue. Do not engage. Send them the truth and step back. That evening, I drafted a single message and attached scanned copies of the will and the signed sale contract. No explanations, no apologies, only facts. Within hours, the angry messages dwindled, cousins falling silent as the evidence stared them in the face. One by one, they stopped responding, their outrage evaporating in the light of legality. Meanwhile, the calls from my parents grew more desperate. My mother left a message at dawn, her voice ragged. "Please, Laura, your brother is under so much pressure. He needs this house. Think about family. Think about your mother." My father tried again later that day. "You are making enemies you do not need to make. End this before it destroys us all." His words carried a weightless threat, as if destruction were not already sitting squarely on their shoulders. The calls became background noise, a chorus of panic I no longer felt compelled to join. I watched as their carefully constructed image of control began to crumble. James had always been reckless but believed himself untouchable with our parents propping him up. Now the documents had cut that support out from under him. He raged on social media, then deleted posts, then posted again, each one more frantic than the last. My mother stopped appearing at her book club, embarrassed by the whispers that followed her. My father skipped his golf outings, his friends distancing themselves from scandal. Rachel kept me updated on the legal front. James's lawyer had reviewed the documents and admitted privately that the case was dead on arrival. Still, James clung to the illusion of power, insisting he would find another way. He threatened to show up at my apartment, though he never did. Perhaps even he knew that crossing that line would only tighten the rope already hanging around his neck. I stayed silent, letting the storm rage itself empty. Each voicemail, each social media rant, each desperate plea was proof that the package had landed where fists and boots could not reach. They had no power left but noise, and I no longer needed to listen. The collapse began quietly, almost invisible at first, like cracks spidering through glass before the whole pane shatters. James stopped posting on social media for 2 days, and when he returned, his tone had shifted from rage to desperation. He begged friends for loans, hinted at new investors, promised that his construction venture was about to turn a corner, but creditors had already begun circling. One by one, past lenders filed claims, and the sheriff's office served him notices. His shiny leased truck was repossessed from the driveway in broad daylight, neighbors peeking through blinds as men in uniforms drove it away. Soon after, his bank accounts were frozen, leaving him scrambling. He moved into a dingy motel on the edge of town, his once swaggering confidence replaced by paranoia. I heard through Rachel that he had been evicted from the motel, too unable to keep up with payments, and had resorted to sharing a cramped apartment with strangers who barely tolerated him. The mighty heir he imagined himself to be had been reduced to living out of boxes. My parents fared no better. For years, they had acted as James's safety net, co-signing his loans, refinancing their own home to cover his mounting debts. They had believed he was destined for greatness, that one more chance, one more investment would finally pay off. But when James fell, their finances toppled with him. The foreclosure notice arrived on their door like a death sentence. Within weeks, their suburban house, once a symbol of status with its manicured lawn and polished front porch, was listed as bank property. My mother, Evelyn, cried in hushed tones to neighbors who no longer offered sympathy. My father, Charles, withdrew into silence, embarrassed by the whispers that spread quickly through their social circle. The book club stopped inviting my mother. The golf buddies stopped calling my father. At 60, they were forced to pack decades of belongings into cardboard boxes and move into a 2-bedroom rental apartment downtown, far from the leafy comfort of their old neighborhood. The loss was not only financial, but social. In their world, reputation was currency, and theirs had been spent into bankruptcy. I watched from a distance as all of it unfolded. I did not gloat, but I did not grieve either. They had made choices, each one a step deeper into James's shadow, and now those choices had consequences. When neighbors recognized me at the grocery store, some offered quiet words of support. "Your grandparents would be proud," one woman told me. "They always said you were the strong one." The words warmed me even as bruises still marked my ribs. The local newspaper even ran a small article about the foreclosure, linking it to mismanagement and failed business ventures. Though my name was absent from the story, I knew the truth echoed louder than any headline. James called once more, his voice cracking in the voicemail. "You ruined me, Laura. Where am I supposed to go?" He wanted pity, but all I felt was clarity. He had ruined himself long before that night at the dinner table, and my parents had helped him dig the hole. My mother texted again and again, begging for a meeting. My father sent a single message. "You have gone too far." But compared to the years they had dismissed me, minimized me, stolen from me, my actions felt measured. For once, I was not carrying their burdens. For once, I was free to let their downfall belong to them. The records of bankruptcy and foreclosure became public, undeniable proof of the rot beneath their facade. Their fall was not a story whispered in corners, but written in ink on official documents. And while they scrambled to salvage their pride, I turned my face toward the future. With the house sold and the funds transferred into my account, a sense of possibility I had never known settled over me. $850,000 was more than I had ever imagined, holding not a fortune compared to the lives of the wealthy, but to me, it was freedom carved from years of neglect. I did not rush to spend it. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, mapping out what my grandparents would have wanted me to do. Margaret had always pushed me toward teaching, reminding me that knowledge was a gift meant to be shared. Henry had believed in building and taking broken things and making them whole. I merged their wisdom into a plan, a startup designed to teach children coding in ways that felt playful and creative, an app that would let kids build games while learning logic and problem solving. Rachel smiled when I pitched the idea to her. "You have vision." "Laura," she said, echoing words my father had once reserved only for James. For the first time, those words felt real. I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a rising Seattle neighborhood. It was half the size of the old house but filled with light, its windows looking out onto a courtyard where children played. I painted the walls a soft gray, hung photographs of my grandparents in the hallway, and placed a vase of roses on the windowsill cuttings from Margaret's garden that had rooted in a small pot. The space felt mine in a way the old house never had, not haunted by voices demanding I yield, but warmed by memories I chose to keep. I worked tirelessly on the app, pouring late nights into design coding and testing. Rachel connected me with colleagues who believed in the vision, and soon we had a small team refining the product. Our launch came quietly uploaded to the App Store without fanfare, but within weeks, downloads began to climb. Parents left reviews praising how their kids laughed while learning. Teachers reached out asking about classroom versions. I read every comment, each one a reminder that I was building something meaningful out of the ashes of betrayal. Months later, an invitation arrived to speak at a Seattle technology conference. Standing backstage, I clutched the clicker with trembling hands, nerves buzzing, but when I stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd, I saw Rachel in the front row, her smile wide, her eyes shining with pride. I spoke about resilience, about turning pain into creation, about how children who are overlooked often grow into innovators if given tools instead of ridicule. The audience rose in applause when I finished, my chest filled with a lightness I had never felt at home. Afterward, as I stepped down, Rachel hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your grandparents would be proud." That night, back in my apartment, I opened Margaret's letter again. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the words glowed as bright as ever. "You gave us love when others only took. This house is yours to protect." I realized then that I had done more than protect a house. I had protected myself, my worth, my future. The legacy of love they entrusted to me had not been lost in the violence of that dinner. It lived on in every line of code I wrote, in every child who smiled while learning, and every rose blooming on my windowsill. The bruises on my ribs had faded by then, faint shadows of a night I would never forget, but in their place was strength. I had been cast out by blood, but in that exile I had found freedom. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I drove past the old house for the first time since selling it. The street looked familiar, yet changed as though time had scrubbed away the tension that once lingered there. The Carters had moved in, and their children's bicycles leaned against the fence, bright helmets dangling from the handlebars. In the garden, roses bloomed more vibrantly than I remembered the air carrying their scent even through my open car window. A new wooden sign hung by the gate carved with the words, "Margaret's Garden." My chest tightened at the sight, tears pricking my eyes, but they were not tears of grief. They were of release. I slowed the car, letting myself absorb the scene, and in my mind I heard my grandmother's voice one last time, telling me to stand tall. I did not stop, did not pull into the driveway because the house no longer belonged to me. It belonged to a family who would fill it with laughter instead of rage, with learning instead of favoritism, with love instead of silence. I drove on the engine, humming steady, and felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, I received scattered messages from my parents and from James. Each one I ignored. My mother's texts grew increasingly frantic before tapering off into silence. My father left a final voicemail saying only, "You have gone too far before never calling again." James's words were bitter, blaming me for his ruin, accusing me of betrayal, but his voice cracked with desperation. I deleted each message without hesitation. Their downfall was not my doing. It was the sum of choices they had made, choices built on entitlement, arrogance, and neglect. Theirs led to ruin. Mine led to freedom. That simple truth anchored me whenever doubt tried to creep back. At my new apartment, I stood by the window one evening watching children play in the courtyard. Their laughter echoed upward, reminding me of the joy that now filled the house on my old street. I touched the frame of my grandparents' photo on the wall and whispered, "I did it." Not for revenge, not even for justice alone, but for myself. Closing that chapter meant opening another. My app continued to grow, schools adopting it, children discovering the power of creation. Every success felt like stitching a wound that had once bled unchecked. The night of the family dinner would never disappear from memory, but it no longer defined me. It was only the moment that pushed me to claim my own life. Driving past the house that last time confirmed what I had known deep down. I was free. Free from their demands, free from their silence, free to live on my own terms. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time I felt eager rather than afraid. Actions have consequences. Theirs had destroyed them. Mine had saved me. You have heard my story, every bruise, every betrayal, every small act of defiance that built into something larger than fists or silence. I told it not just to free myself, but because I know I am not the only one. Many of you listening right now have sat at tables where your worth was dismissed, where your voice was ignored, where someone you loved struck you with words or with hands, and others chose to look away. If you have lived through that, I want you to know you are not alone. I want you to know that your pain matters, that the scars you carry are not shameful, but proof of survival. For decades, my family told me I was fine. That single word was used to erase me, to tell me my needs were not real, to convince me that I should accept less. Maybe you too have been told that you are fine when you were not. Maybe you too have carried the weight of being overlooked. I am here to tell you that you do not have to accept it anymore. Stand tall. Protect what is yours, whether it is a home, a dream, or simply your own dignity. The law may not always be on your side, but your resolve can be. You are never too old, never too worn down, never too broken to claim your fire again. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from right now, and what time of day is it where you are? Share it in the comments so I know how far my story reaches. And tell me, have you ever faced favoritism or betrayal in your family? Have you ever been pushed aside and had to fight back? I read your stories and they remind me that community is stronger than silence. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter, because I will continue to tell stories for those who feel unseen. Share this with someone who might need the reminder that freedom is possible, that consequences are real, and that healing can follow even the deepest wounds. I stood alone under a porch light once, bleeding and humiliated, but I am not alone now. You are here. We are together, and that changes everything.